Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome to the preliminary episode 0 if you will, of the 400 Mini show, which is a show that is going to go through the built-in games of the recently released 400 Mini, along with some recommendations of some things you might want to load onto the system yourself to have a bit of fun with. Now for this preliminary episode, we're not going to play any games in any great detail, because it's release day at the time of recording. I just wanted to go through the system, give you a quick guided tour of what it offers, show you what it can do, talk a little bit about what it can't do, and then hopefully by the end of it you'll have a slightly better idea of what this little thing is. Now the first and most important thing to note is that this is not intended to be a complete replacement for a real Atari 8-bit computer. It is first and foremost a plug-and-play games console. It has 25 built-in games, it boots straight to the menu of these games when you turn it on, and if you want to do anything more with it, you have to do a little bit of tinkering yourself. Exactly how much tinkering you need to do depends on exactly what you want to do with it, and there's some things you will never be able to do with it without actually going on and hacking it and adding extended capabilities to it. But there is actually a surprising amount you can do with it straight out of the box. You will need one thing, which is a USB stick. But most of us have probably got some of those floating around anyway. So, like I say, we're going to take a tour of the 400 Mini today, but this series on an ongoing basis is not just for 400 Mini owners. I want this to be a series that helps spread the wonderful word of the Atari 8-bit home computers to people who are perhaps new to them or people who haven't explored them for a long time. The 400 Mini is a very convenient way of doing that, but you can also do it through emulation and various other means as well. There's even online websites where you can run Atari 8-bit games directly in your web browser. So this series is intended for anyone who has an interest in the Atari 8-bit really, primarily 400 Mini owners, but if you're just an emulation enthusiast, or indeed if you've even got some real hardware lying around that you haven't used for a while, that's what this is about. We're not going to get too technical, we're not going to go too in-depth onto various things about electronics and so on. We're not going to do a tear down or anything like that today, largely because if I took this thing apart, I don't think I'd be able to tell you what I was looking at. What I can do though is go through the interface, show you what it offers, show you what it can do, and give you some ideas of what you might want to try with it if you happen to pick one up for yourself. So what we're looking at here is the main menu. This is the carousel of 25 games that are included with the system. And you'll see as you scroll through, there's a little screenshot and a little summary of each game as you go through. You'll also see it indicates if the game is one player only, or if it's two players, or if it supports two or more players. You see there's a 2P plus icon there. That means it potentially supports 3 or 4 players as well. The 400 Mini has 4 USB ports in the front, plus another one in the back for your USB stick or anything else you might want to attach to it. And so yeah, those games that did support 4 players on the original Atari 400 and 800 model 8-bit computers, you can play them 4-player here, which is nice. You'll also see there's a star rating there, and by choosing a game and pressing one of the ring buttons on the included controller, which the manual also tells you the equivalent mappings for various other popular controllers as well, you can rate a game between 0 and 4 stars. And that's used for sorting. It allows you to sort of pick out which ones are your most favourites, and then you can use the sort function to sort by author, by genre, by year, by publisher, by favourite, which will sort by your star rating, and then back to title again. And the little icon to the right of that shows you how many save states you have recorded for this. So we don't have any to Boulder Dash at the moment. If you pull down on the joystick, you'll see that the save states are represented like classic old Atari cartridges, which is nice. And you can lock and unlock save games as well. So if you've got a save game that you don't want to lose, you can lock it and prevent you from saving over it. Equally, if you decide you do want to save over something, you can then unlock it. Okay, so starting a game from the carousel is a simple matter of just picking it and pressing the fire button on the joystick, and then you're straight into it. So there's no fuss, there's no configuring or anything like that. All the games are set up to work straight away. They've got default control mappings that you can't change, which is a bit of a shame. But the controls for all these games are very simple anyway, so it's unlikely that you will need to remap the controls for these. The one thing that some people might want to do is switch the joystick to left-handed mode, which you can do, because normally you're expected to hold the stick with your right hand and press the fire button with your left thumb. But with a particular button combination that I can't remember offhand, but is included in the manual, you can rotate the controller through 90 degrees so that you can use it left-handed. So holding the stick in your left hand and pressing the fire button with your right thumb. While you're within a game, you can press the menu button, which is one of the buttons on the back of the controller, to take you straight back to the carousel. And that suspends what you're doing in the game at the time. So you can just press the home button and go straight back into the game and go back and forth. And also, if you press both the menu and the home button at the same time, you can pop up the on-screen keyboard, which you can use with the joystick. So that allows you to type things in if you do need to type things in. There's a few limitations on that. You can't do any simultaneous key presses, so you can't, say, press Control P or whatever. So if you want to do simultaneous key presses, you will need to connect to USB keyboards. But for basics like entering your name into high score tables and such like, the on-screen keyboard is absolutely fine. And that can be dismissed again with the press of those buttons. So if we go back to the menu and then press the menu button again, we have a few options. There's not very many options to fiddle around with here. We've got display options for 4:3 and pixel perfect. 4:3 actually sort of distorts the aspect ratio slightly from what it would appear on a regular TV. So I highly recommend going on pixel perfect straight away and never looking back. That just means that all of the pixels on screen will be square in most cases. There's a couple of graphics modes where they're not, but the display should scale evenly and look nice on a modern television. You can also enable a CRT effect, which puts some scan lines on the screen. Let's just see how that affects. Probably won't be able to see it very well in Battle Zone, but no, in fact you can't see it at all in Battle Zone. But let's pick something with slightly more colourful visuals. Let's say Boulder Dash. Boulder Dash has pretty colourful visuals. Now the scan line effect is quite subtle. You might not even be able to see it on the video there, but it is there. There's some quite subtle scan lines. I believe, actually it's hard to judge from. It's hard to judge on with that scrolling background there. So let's just start the game. No, I was wondering if there was a slight interlaced effect where the scan line is kind of rolling, but I don't think there is. It doesn't look like it. There's also a very slight softening effect on the image with the scan lines as well. Yeah, you can see on the background that Rockford's digging out there. You can see the scan lines a little bit more clearly there. Possibly. Well, I can anyway while I'm recording. I don't know if you can on the video. That is down to YouTube's compression algorithms. Anyway, let's not get bogged down in playing Boulder Dash, because that's a great game, but we'll talk about that another time. So, back to the options. Let's turn off the CRT effect. You can also choose a frame to go around your gameplay. So that's just like a bezel that goes around the game screen. There's a selection of those. I'm not a huge fan of these, but if you do want something like that, you can have that. And it looks something like this. There you go. It just gives a bit of pop to the image, if you like. Like I say, I'm not a huge fan because I like the visuals to speak for themselves, really. So I'm going to be keeping that off. But if you want it on, go you. You have the option. That's a global setting, by the way. You can't set that per game, which is a bit of a shame, but I'm sure you'll get over it. Then we've got language, which is self-explanatory. It supports all those languages there for the interface. And then there's advanced options, which are pretty bare bones at the minute, but I'm sure with some firmware updates they will add some things in here. In system options, you can adjust the level of the music in the menu. System information just tells you what version the system's firmware is running. So if you're not sure if you need a firmware update or not, you can compare that to the version information on the 400 Mini's website. You can shut down the device from here, legal notices, and then factory reset. Now at the moment, factory reset is the only way to change from 50 Hz PAL mode to NTSC mode, because when you first turn the system on, it asks you which one you want to do. So I'm in the UK. I grew up with 50 Hz PAL machines, which have a slightly different color palette to NTSC machines. A lot of today's Atari scene is based in PAL regions as well. So yeah, unless you have a particularly strong reason for desiring to be NTSC, if you grew up with NTSC, or if you prefer the color palette, or if you've got a bunch of games that only work in NTSC, I would probably be inclined to recommend you go with PAL. But again, that is your choice. At the moment, you can't switch without doing a factory reset, which is not a huge deal. But again, it's something that it would be nice to be updated with a subsequent firmware update. And that's about it for the basic features, to be honest. What we'll now do is we'll have a look at this media access section here, which is where you can get into sort of the extended capabilities of this machine. So for this icon to pop up, you need a USB stick. Any old USB stick is fine. I've got just a 16 gigabyte FAT32 one in there. And I've put a bunch of stuff in here. So I've put some games. It recommends that you put them in subfolders, because it can only display a limited number in one folder at once. So if there's more than, I think it's 200 files in a folder, it will cut off the last files, so you won't see them. So it's a good idea to do something like this, which is alphabetize your games, or just have a bit of restraint. Anyway, so from here, you can pick what you want to do. So let's pick a game to play. I'm going to pick a modern homebrew game, because these often have slightly more specific requirements in terms of what kind of Atari 8-bit is going to be running the system than older stuff. So we're going to take this game here called Binary Parasite. Now we could just start the game by pressing the fire button to select it, which puts it in the current media section down at the bottom, and then press the home button on the controller to start the game. But we'll pop into the game settings menu first of all. And those of you who use the A500 Mini, this page will look relatively familiar, albeit with some different settings. So from here you can choose what kind of Atari system you are simulating. So you can simulate the 400 and 800, which are largely similar in terms of capabilities and OS. But I suspect the 800 model, it doesn't actually say, but I suspect the 800 model simulates having a bit more RAM installed. The 800 XL is the 64K model that everyone loves, and the 130XE is the 128K model that came out a little bit later and was a contemporary of the ST. So for more recent homebrew stuff, it's often a good idea to plump for the 130XE. At the moment, you can't go beyond 128K of simulated RAM, which is a little bit of a shame, because there's some demos and homebrew games that require a little bit more RAM. At the moment, you won't be able to run these on here. This does also simulate the Atari 5200, so if you have any ROMs lying around for the Atari 5200 system, legally acquired of course, you can play them on this as well. You choose whether or not to enable BASIC. So on the original 400 and 800 Atari computers, BASIC came on a cartridge, and some games required that you run them with the BASIC cartridge in. On the 800XL and 130XE, BASIC was built into the system, but you could disable it by holding down the Option key on the keyboard as the system was turning on. So if it's turned off as it is here, that's simulating not having the BASIC cartridge in or holding down the Option key on the XL and XE. If you turn it on like this, that simulates having the BASIC cartridge in or just turning the system on the XL and XE. Down here we've got cropping options, so you can crop the display to your liking. Well, not quite to your liking. These settings are a little bit limited at the moment for my taste. I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. But a lot of stuff, particularly older stuff, you won't have to play around with this too much. You can then set whether the game uses joystick or paddle controls. There is no paddle controller available for the 400 Mini at the moment, but you can simulate one using either the included joystick, or you can use a third-party controller such as a DualShock from a PlayStation or an Xbox controller, and use the analog stick on that to simulate a paddle. Not 100% ideal, because paddles are very much their own distinct thing, and it would be nice to see some USB ones. But you can simulate them in the meantime. And then you can map the controls. This is the important thing, because the included joystick with the Atari 400 Mini, just the 400 Mini I should say, has 8 buttons altogether. It's got the standard fire button, it's got a little shoulder button underneath the top left corner, it's got the 2 buttons on the front, which are menu and home, and it's got the 4 ring buttons, the top, left, right and bottom. And what you can do from this screen here is you can choose what each of those apply to. So here at the moment we are choosing the joystick action for pushing up on the joystick. So we just want that to be joystick up, so we can just skip over that. Joystick down, yeah, joystick left, joystick right, joystick fire. Now the standard default settings for that have the top ring button on the controller assigned to the start key, the right ring button assigned to select, and the menu button on the controller assigned to option, which is fine for a lot of things. But if you do have a game that uses keyboard controls, let's skip to an unused one. So let's say we want to assign the spacebar to the bottom ring button here. We can bring up the keyboard here, and we can say assign that to the spacebar. So that then means when you press that button on the controller, it's as if you were pressing the spacebar on the original system's keyboard. Okay, and those settings are saved per game, so it will automatically remember those settings that we've put in place for binary Parasite there. So anytime you start it up from now on, it will use those settings. And if you change those settings, again, it will apply to those from there on. So hit the home button, it starts the game. And there it is. This is a game from 2023, so a very recent one. And you'll see it is handling it perfectly fine. Complete with music, some nice animations, colour effects, and everything that the good old Atari is named for. Yeah, this is definitely a game we'll be spending some time with in the near future, because this was a recent discovery of mine. It's a fantastic game. But we're not going to get bogged down in that now. Let's head back to the menu. And if you pull back on the stick here, you can save state for any of your own games as well, which is nice. So that saves you having to worry about having save game discs for things like adventure games and role-playing games and that sort of thing. So that's quite convenient. Right, let's head back to the media select menu. And go back a folder. There we are. Now, one thing that I saw a few people asking about on the Atari Age forums is how this handles things like using BASIC for saving your own programs, and how it handles things like cartridge-based software that have the facility to save to disk. So we'll cover BASIC first. When you put in a USB stick, the 400 Mini will automatically create this disk image here called the 400 BASIC, which again, you can access the save settings as you see fit. We'll go for 130XE. And let's just make the display a little bit wider as well. And then fire that up. And that will take a moment just to set up DOS in the background, which allows you to do disk access. And then you can just use BASIC as if it was a standard Atari computer. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to type in a listing from Page 6 magazine, written by Mark Hutchinson, who went on to be the magazine's resident first step specialist for writing beginner-friendly articles. So yeah, I'll probably do this in accelerated time, so you don't have to watch me type in real time, but I'll be right back when I finish typing. Okay, and there we go. So that is a program that has been typed in from Page 6 magazine. You saw me make an error along there as well. When you're using a USB keyboard, you can use the cursor keys on the keyboard rather than having to do control and the cursor keys as on the original Atari. One thing I couldn't find a inverse key. There is, on the original Atari, there was a key in the corner of the keyboard that allowed you to type in inverse video, and I could not find that among the keys on the USB keyboard. There may well be one there that I just haven't figured out yet, but yeah, it is. I can't figure that out. So what we can do when we've written a basic program is we can just use the Atari basic save commands. And that will save it to disk. And if you want to check that it's there, you just type DOS and press A for disk directory. And press return, and you'll see there's hello.baz taking up 12 sectors on the disk. Press B to go back into basic. And if you type list, your program should still be there. And then all we have to do is run the program. Now we can hopefully see that that's not quite running properly because it's not going through the entire program. So I've probably made a mistake somewhere. But debugging that could wait for another time. That is how using BASIC works on the Atari 400 Mini. If you want to have more than one disk for your basic programs, all you need to do is duplicate that disk image file that it creates on the USB stick for you. You have to do that on a computer. There's no means of doing it on the system itself, which is a bit of a shame, but not entirely unexpected. All right, let's go back to the menu. Now, to answer the question that people had about running a cartridge-based piece of software, and that working with disk, I'll show you how that works right now. So if we pop in the cartridge for the programming language action by selecting it and pressing the fire button, and also select this DOS 2.5 disk here, you'll see that they're both loaded in at the same time down at the bottom. So all you do then is you press home to start the program. It will take you into the action interface in this instance. Now I'm not entirely sure I can remember how to do this, but let me see if I can remember what I learned earlier. So I don't think action checks your syntax as you type. Oh, I can't turn caps lock back on. How does one do that? With shift and caps lock. Right, I think that's it. And then we do Control Shift W to do write. Let's call it hello world.act. And again, if we go back to the menu, unload the cartridge and load just the disk, that happens to have DOS on it again, you see there is the file we saved. And so that works for whatever you're running, really. So if you're booting a program from disk and saving to a disk, you can do it that way. Or if you're running from cartridge, something like Atari Writer or Atari Artist, you can save to disk on that as well. So should you have some burning desire to use the 400 Mini for vaguely productive purposes, you can actually do that. And because the disk images that this uses are a fairly standardized format, it should be reasonably straightforward to get the files off the 400 Mini and onto a PC to do something like printing with them, or loading the text into like a desktop publishing package or something. So there's plenty of flexibility there, plenty of possibilities, which is all very exciting. Okay, what else do we want to do? Some people were asking about the sound capabilities. Now, you might have heard some slightly funny sounds in Boulder Dash earlier, which I hadn't noticed before. But apparently a good test of the sound capabilities is this Instrumentarium demo here. So this is designed to run on real Ataris rather than emulators. It runs fine in Altira, which is probably the best Atari emulator available for home computers. But I haven't tried this on the 400 Mini yet. So let's load this up, cross our fingers, and hope it sounds all right. I mean, I'm not an expert, but this sounds okay to me. I think it does sound slightly different to how it came out in Altira earlier. Actually, this might vary according to what kind of Atari model you put it on, mightn't it? So let's pop that on the 130XE and see if that makes a difference. No, that sounds pretty much the same to me. I mean, to my relatively untrained ear, that sounds okay. I've heard bad Pokey emulation. If you watch my Atari A to Z flashback series, you will have seen that the Atari 5200 games in that collection have some atrocious Pokey emulation, where any melodic lines are just slightly out of tune, and it's enough for them to sound quite painful. But this sounds as I would expect it to sound, to be honest. There's a slight hint of stuff dropping out of tune there, but considering they are fairly adamant about that demo being for real Ataris only, I think the 400 Mini's doing a reasonable job of that there. Right, what else should we have a look at today? Oh, multi-disc games. So if you've got a game that has multiple discs, such as, for example, let's say the text adventure Gruds in Space here, what you can do is you can insert one disc. Now normally when you pick another disc with the fire button, it just switches to that disc. But if you press the shoulder button instead, you can attach up to 3 in total. And then when you start the game, it will boot from the first one, and then there is a key combination that allows you to switch to the others. And it's a key combination that I have actually forgotten. So I will just load this up and I will see if I can remember what that might be. By which I mean I'm going to look it up in the manual. So just bear with me one moment while I do that. Multi-disc game support, page 19. Okay, so what you do is while you're playing the game, you hold the home button and press the down button on the joystick, as in the down ring button. So normally this game will ask you to change discs pretty much after starting. So if I start this off with look, screen, yeah, there we are. So please insert site 2 and press any key. So if I hold the home button and push down, there we are, disc 2 of 3, And there we go. That's disk swapping. So if I want to change to my save game disk, that's my third disk of 3. You just do that and you can cycle around them as you see fit. Now, if you have more than 3 disks for a particularly complicated game, you can't load them up just like we demonstrated there. You have to set up an M3U playlist. That's just a text file that lists the file names of all the disks you want, and then you boot it from the playlist. And then I assume, I haven't tried it yet, I assume you would just do the same to swap around the disks in that same way. So yeah, that is multi-disc support. And I think that's probably everything that I want to show in this initial tour. It's a pretty straightforward and simple system to use. Like I say, it's designed primarily to be a plug-and-play games console, and that is what it does. But hopefully from what you've seen, what we've done today, you can see that it is possible to do some other things with this as well. One thing that you won't be able to do is attach additional peripherals to it. So you, as far as I'm aware anyway, you won't be able to attach a USB printer and print something from Atari Writer. That'd be cool if you could, but I somehow doubt that that's a particular priority for the developers. But like I say, what you can do is you can save stuff to your disk images on your USB stick, take that USB stick out, stick it in your PC, and then manipulate the files on there and do whatever you want with them. So if for some reason you find using Atari Writer preferable to Microsoft Word, just to maybe have a sort of clutter-free writing environment, which I can definitely see the appeal of, yeah, there's nothing stopping you doing that, which is pretty good. So, things that I would like to see tweaked on this in upcoming firmware updates. I would like the option for a little bit more memory, so that stuff that requires, for example, 320k of RAM or something like that will be able to work. Some people want to see support for additional hardware, like additional Poké chips, because there's some homebrew games and demos out there designed for dual Poké chips to give stereo sound. That'd be nice. That's not a particular deal breaker for me, but it's a nice to have. I would like to see the option for realistic disk drive timings, because at the moment this uses accelerated load times and it doesn't make the input-output noises that you hear on a real Atari 8-bit. Now that might not sound like a big deal to you, and it may not be a big deal to you, but for those of us who grew up with the Atari 8-bit, those little bits of the experience, like being able to hear the input-output noises and having to wait for things to load, it's part of the experience, part of the nostalgia. So to have the option for that to be there would be really nice. Again, probably not something that's a particularly high priority, but it is something that I personally would like to see. Aside from that, I'm very happy with what I've seen so far. I would like to see the cropping options updated. Yes, I was going to show you an example of where the cropping doesn't quite work, wasn't I? So if we open up this excellent Atari 8-bit port of Bosconian here, and if I just pop up the settings, you'll see I've got the display width and height set to their maximum possible values here. But if I start the game, you see the very top of the title screen is chopped off there. And when we get into the game itself, you'll see just the very top and bottom of the status bar on the right hand side are chopped off as well. Not enough to make it unplayable, but because this game is obviously putting stuff in the overscan area of the TV, or what would have been the overscan area of the TVs on classic systems, yeah, it's just chopping those off just because it's not possible to set the cropping to a value that allows all of that to be in frame, which is a bit of a shame. That's something I'd like to see changed. Again, it's not a major issue right now, but particularly for modern homebrew and demo stuff, excuse me, particularly for modern homebrew and demo stuff, which is a big part of today's Atari scene, I know a lot of people would like to see that fixed in a firmware update, and that should hopefully be a fairly easy fix for the team at Retro Games. because as you can see, there is some unused screen space even at that maximum screen width and screen height. So hopefully they've got a little bit more space to play with, so all they need to do is make the maximum values of those settings a little bit higher, and then everything will be fine. So yeah, anyway, before I get too stuck into Bosconian, that is the 400 Mini. And so from here, we'll be going through the games that are included on the system, along with some games that I think that newcomers to Atari 8-bits should check out. Or again, if you're a lapsed Atari 8-bit user, or if you just haven't used them for a while, or you just want some ideas on some new things to play. Like I say, this series is not just for 400 Mini users by any means. It just so happens that I'm using the 400 Mini as the sort of centerpiece of this because it's new and exciting. But yeah, that is the 400 Mini. A quick tour. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. I'm sure I'll have forgotten something as soon as I press the stop button here. But I hope you enjoyed that. Any questions, feel free to pop them down in the comments, and will do my best to answer them, assuming I see them. And yeah, I look forward to sharing some games with you in the coming weeks. So for now, just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.